40 enemy aircraft destroyed, and not once did he brag about it. Richard Ira Bong was never meant to be a legend, just a quiet farm kid from Poplar, Wisconsin who fell in love with flying. But when war consumed the Pacific, he strapped himself into the cockpit of a P-38 Lightning and became something the enemy feared more than storms or darkness. His secret wasn't raw aggression, it was precision. Bong closed in so tight on enemy aircraft that oil sometimes splattered across his canopy. He learned from his mentor, Captain Thomas Lynch, that distance was wasted opportunity. From his first kill over Buna in December 1942 to breaking Eddie Rickenbacker's record of 26 victories, Bong fought through clouds of tracer fire, zero mercy, and skies where pilots vanished without a trace. By the time General Douglas MacArthur pinned the Medal of Honor on his chest, Bong had become an icon, an unshakable guardian of American airmen. He married Marjorie Vatendal, finally believing the war was behind him, but fate was cruel. On August 6, 1945, the same day the world first learned the word Hiroshima, Major Bong died testing a P-80 jet, not in combat but in the pursuit of the next aviation frontier. He never saw the peace he helped win. Yet today, his name stands alone, America's greatest fighter ace, 40 victories, 0 ego, 1 unforgettable legacy. The Pacific Theater, 1942. A world at war. The skies over New Guinea are thick with monsoon rain, humidity, and the constant threat of death. Down below, soldiers slog through disease-ridden jungles and coral-cut beaches. Above them, another battlefield rages. One measured not in trenches or miles, but in seconds, altitude, and instinct. The Empire of Japan dominates the air early in the war. The Mitsubishi A6M0, light, agile, deadly, strikes fear into Allied pilots. Many young Americans climb into their aircraft knowing they may never return. Some last weeks, some only days. The air war is a brutal teacher. This is where we meet an unlikely hero. Not a loud leader, not a man built on bravado or swagger, but a shy farm kid from Wisconsin named Richard Ira Bong. Born into a quiet life surrounded by fields, barns, and the rhythm of hard work, no one imagined he would become the greatest American fighter ace who ever lived. He wasn't the fastest pilot, he wasn't the strongest, he wasn't even the most confident. But what Bong did have was something far rarer. Patience under pressure, a marksman's instinct, and an unwavering calm in the chaos of aerial combat. His aircraft, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine fighter unlike anything else in the sky, fast, rugged, armed with .450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon firing from its nose in a tight, concentrated line of destruction. Some pilots struggled to master it, but for Bong, the P-38 felt like an extension of his body, as natural as holding a rifle or breathing air. His unit, the 49th Fighter Group, pilots forged in sweat, exhaustion, and relentless combat sorties. These young men carried fear with them every morning, but they also carried hope. Hope that each mission would bring them one step closer to survival and one step closer to ending the war. Among them was Captain Thomas Lynch, the mentor Bong never knew he needed. Lynch was confident, skilled, respected, a natural leader and one of the earliest American aces of the Pacific. He taught Bong a simple yet deadly principle: get close. Closer than comfort, closer than instinct, than fire. Bong absorbed this wisdom like scripture. He didn't waste bullets. He didn't gamble on long-distance shots. He stalked his prey, quiet, patient, relentless. Every mission carried the same razor-thin line between victory and oblivion. Each time Bong lifted off, he knew there was no certainty he would ever return. The Pacific swallowed pilots without ceremony. One moment, a dogfight filled the sky, smoke trails, tracer fire, metal shredding under pressure, and the next moment, everything disappeared into green jungle or endless ocean. But despite the danger, Bong continued flying and winning. His victories began to stack, not 1 or 2, but 10, then 20, then 26, breaking the standing American record, held since World War I by Eddie Rickenbacker. The men flying beside Bong watched in awe, and sometimes disbelief, as he remained humble through it all. No room for arrogance, no desire for stardom. While others celebrated loudly, Bong simply cleaned his weapons, studied his tactics, and prepared for the next dawn. And yet, outside the cockpit, he remained almost impossibly human. He wrote letters home. He missed winter snow. He fell in love with a young woman named Marjorie Vatendal, whose picture he taped inside his P-38. To him, she was a reminder that there was more than war, more than the sky, more than survival. She represented tomorrow. So why does this story matter? Because Richard Bong represents something rare in war, a hero who never saw himself as one. A man who became the deadliest American fighter pilot not through rage or vengeance, but through discipline, respect, and quiet mastery. His life proves that greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient, sometimes it's precise, sometimes it is carved not in words, but in the thin air between life and death at 20,000 feet. His victories, his losses, his love, and his fate shaped one of the most extraordinary aviation stories of the Second World War. And now, we step into his cockpit. This is the story of Major Richard Ira Bong, the greatest American ace of World War II. Before Richard Bong ever squeezed the trigger of his P-38 Lightning in combat, the skies of the Pacific had already become one of the deadliest battlegrounds in human history. The United States entered the air war in the Pacific after devastating losses. Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, the fall of the Philippines, and the brutal retreat through the Pacific left the Allies scrambling. The Japanese Zero dominated the early months of the war. Its light frame, extreme maneuverability, and superb turn radius made it the king of the air. American pilots flying outdated aircraft often never stood a chance. By mid-1942, the United States was pushing back. The Marines fought on Guadalcanal, U.S. naval forces secured Midway, and slowly, painfully, the balance began to shift. But the terrain was unforgiving. New Guinea, where Richard Bong was first deployed, wasn't just another battlefield. It was a world of extremes. Dense jungle swallowed wreckage whole, and mountains wrapped themselves in thick cloud cover that could hide everything from Zero squadrons to entire airfields. The ground was crawling with malaria. Venomous insects, brutal humidity, food shortages, and heat exhaustion became as dangerous as enemy bullets. Even seasoned pilots dreaded flying here. The weather changed without warning. One wrong turn meant vanishing forever in the green maze below. Into this chaos entered the 49th Fighter Group, one of the first American units tasked with taking back control of the sky. Its pilots were young, some barely out of high school. Many had never fired their weapons in combat, but they were determined, hardened not by arrogance but necessity. Among them stood two men whose names would be forever linked, Captain Thomas Lynch and the quiet newcomer Richard Ira Bong. Lynch was everything Bong wasn't: confident, experienced, a natural combat leader with an instinct for danger and a flair for bold maneuvers. Other pilots gravitated toward him because he flew like he was born for war. When Lynch spoke about flying, everyone listened. Then there was Bong, soft-spoken, almost shy, with a reserved manner that made some wonder if he even belonged in combat. But inside him lived something rare, a calm intensity, a hunger for mastery, not adrenaline. He studied the P-38 Lightning with a level of focus that bordered on obsession. He practiced gunnery at ranges others considered suicidal. Where other pilots fired from hundreds of yards away, Bong waited until he could count rivets on enemy wings. The P-38 itself was both feared and misunderstood. Twin engines, long wings, a distinctive twin-boom tail design. It looked unlike any fighter in the sky. But hidden within that frame was speed, firepower, and stability that could overwhelm even the legendary Zero, if flown correctly. The Lightning could dive faster than any Japanese aircraft and climb with brutal acceleration. But if handled carelessly, it became unforgiving. Bong didn't just fly the Lightning, he understood. As American presence grew in the Pacific, intelligence reports painted a grim picture. Japanese convoys, fighter escorts, and supply routes stretched like veins across islands and sea lanes. If the Allies couldn't break Japanese air superiority, ground forces would never advance. The outcome of the entire Pacific War depended on which side controlled the sky. And so, the airfields of Port Moresby, WWII, and Nadzab became launching pads for the young American fighter groups determined to take that control. Pilots woke before sunrise, studying reconnaissance photos, enemy formations, and weather patterns. Flight crews worked endlessly under blistering heat to ready aircraft, changing out ammunition belts, repairing bullet-ridden metal, replacing engines that had been pushed beyond their limits. Each morning, engines roared to life, one after another, filling the humid air with thunder, the metallic smell of oil, exhaust, and gunpowder mixed with the scent of rain and jungle rot. Pilots strapped in, feeling both invincible and mortal at the same time. Some joked before takeoff, others stayed silent. Many carried lucky tokens, family photos, medals, letters they reread before every mission. Because in New Guinea, one truth was constant: not all who took off would return. As combat intensified, so did expectations. American command needed results. The Japanese needed to keep their supply lines alive. Every mission was a collision course, raw skill versus desperation. By late 1942, whispers spread among squadrons. A new pilot had arrived. Quiet, focused, deadly accurate. The kid from Wisconsin was beginning to score kills, not by luck, not by chance, but with a chilling consistency that made even veteran pilots take notice. The war was shifting, not because of one man alone, but because of countless sacrifices, innovations, and determination. Yet fate had chosen one pilot to rise higher than the rest, not for fame, but because his instincts, courage, and skill perfectly met the moment history demanded. Richard Ira Bong was no longer just a farm boy. He was becoming something else. Something the Japanese would soon fear. A force in the sky. A master of the P-38 Lightning. A name that would rewrite American aviation history. The dawn sky over New Guinea glowed orange as Bong's P-38 Lightning roared into the air, climbing toward a formation of Japanese bombers heavily guarded by Zero fighters. If they reached Allied lines, hundreds would die. Most pilots would have waited, circled, or broken away, but Bong's voice over the radio was steady and quiet. Get close. And don't stop firing until you see pieces. He dove straight into the formation, tracer fire screaming past his canopy, and at impossibly close range, so close he could see the enemy pilot's goggles. He fired, shredding the first Zero in a burst so powerful debris struck his own aircraft. More fighters swarmed him, one latching onto his tail and riddling his fuselage with rounds, but Bong pulled a perfect vertical loop, flipped behind the attacker, and fired again. Another Zero spiraled into the sea. His wingman was now under attack, 2 enemy fighters closing in, and Bong dove once more, firing short, lethal bursts. One Zero disappeared in flame, the other broke apart mid-air. With the escorts scattered, Bong lined up the lead bomber and flew straight into turret fire until a single burst ignited its engine and sent it falling in smoke below. When the surviving Japanese fighters fled, Bong limped back to base with a torn canopy, bullet-scarred wings, and metal fragments lodged in his fuselage. As ground crews stared in disbelief, someone finally asked how many he got. Bong simply shrugged and said almost apologetically, 4, maybe 5. When Bong stepped down from his battered P-38 that morning, word spread quickly across the airfield, not just that he'd survived, but what he'd done. Pilots gathered around the aircraft, running their hands over the torn metal and bullet holes like archaeologists studying a relic. Mechanics shook their heads in disbelief. Officers exchanged quiet looks, understanding what others didn't yet realize. This wasn't luck, or adrenaline, or a single heroic moment. This was mastery. From that day forward, Richard Bong wasn't just another pilot. He became the ace every young aviator wanted to fly beside, and the one every Japanese fighter was warned to avoid. As his victories climbed into the 20s, then 30s, and finally 40 confirmed kills, his reputation evolved from impressive to unbelievable. For the men fighting in the jungles and seas below, Bong's success meant more than a number. It meant Allied transport planes could fly safer, ground troops could advance under friendly skies, and the once terrifying Zero no longer felt untouchable. Each enemy aircraft he destroyed chipped away at Japan's air dominance and brought the Pacific War closer to a turning point. But all that admiration came with a cost. Every kill added more pressure. Every mission carried a heavier unspoken question: how long can someone fly at the edge of death before death finally reaches back? By late 1944, Bong had become a symbol. Newspapers called him America's Ace of Aces, and schoolchildren memorized his name like a sports star or folk hero. Yet Bong himself remained unchanged, soft-spoken, modest, and uncomfortable with attention. When he surpassed Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26 victories, he tried to deflect praise. When his commanders encouraged him to take safer assignments, he insisted on flying. Eventually, the U.S. Army Air Forces intervened, not because he wasn't capable, but because they feared losing him. General George Kenney reportedly told Bong, half joking and half desperate, "You've done enough. I don't want to lose you. If you keep flying, one day you won't come back." Soon after, General Douglas MacArthur awarded Bong the Medal of Honor, and Bong, reluctantly, was pulled from frontline combat. He had earned his place in history, whether he wanted it or not. But war doesn't pause for sentiment. While Bong spent his remaining service stateside testing aircraft, the Pacific continued burning. The battles of the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa tore into the final years of the conflict. Bong married Marjorie Vattendahl, the woman whose photograph he had carried with him in the cockpit, a symbol of the life he hoped would exist after the war. For the first time in years, a future seemed real. Peace felt close enough to touch. Then, on August 6, 1945, the world changed twice. That morning, Richard Bong climbed into the cockpit of a new aircraft, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, America's earliest operational jet fighter. It was still experimental, still unpredictable. Bong, being one of the most skilled pilots alive, was tasked with testing it. Just after takeoff from Burbank, the engine failed. Bong tried to eject, but it was too late. The aircraft slammed into the ground and erupted into flame. The greatest American ace of World War II died not in combat over a Pacific island, but in a peacetime accident over California. Hours later, on the other side of the world, the atomic bomb detonated above Hiroshima. Radio broadcasts carried two headlines: the weapon that would help end the war, and the death of Richard Ira Bong. To many Americans, it felt symbolic, like history itself was closing a chapter. The skies Bong had fought so fiercely to protect would soon fall silent. The war he helped turn in America's favor was entering its final act. His legacy wasn't built on glory or arrogance, but on precision, discipline, and quiet courage. He never saw himself as a hero, but to the pilots who survived because he dominated the air, to the soldiers who lived because the skies became safer, to the nation that needed hope during its darkest hours, Richard Bong was more than a man. He was proof that sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who never raise their voice, only their standard. And long after the guns fell silent, the world remembered him not just for his 40 victories, but for how he earned them, with skill, humility, and heart. When we look back at Richard Bong's life, it becomes clear that his legacy was never truly about numbers, medals, or headlines. His 40 aerial victories may define the record books, but they do not define the man. What made Bong remarkable wasn't just what he accomplished, it was how he accomplished it. He fought without ego, led without demanding attention, and risked everything not for personal glory, but because others depended on him. He understood a truth many discover too late: greatness is not loud. It does not shout. It lives in discipline, humility, and the quiet willingness to step forward when others hesitate. Bong reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. Every time he climbed into his P-38, he knew the odds. He had watched friends vanish into smoke, disappear into ocean swells, or fail to return from missions that seemed routine. He carried those losses with him, but he never let them paralyze him. Instead, they sharpened his focus and deepened his resolve. He flew the way he lived: thoughtful, steady, deliberate. Not reckless, responsible, not desperate, committed. There is also sacrifice woven through every chapter of his story. Sacrifice of comfort, sacrifice of safety, sacrifice of a quiet, peaceful future he might have lived if the world had never gone to war. In the end, the cost was his life, but the reward was something far greater, a legacy that continues to inspire generations of pilots, soldiers, and ordinary people who understand that some missions are worth everything. Leadership, too, takes many forms. Bong never commanded through force or intimidation. He didn't need theatrics or bravado to earn respect. Others followed him because his actions spoke louder than any speech. When a man repeatedly walks into danger, not for himself but for those beside him, he becomes a leader, whether he asks to be one or not. And so his story leaves us with a question, the kind that lingers long after the film ends: what truly defines a hero? Victory, reputation, or character? Richard Bong's life suggests an answer. A hero is someone who does what must be done with skill, humility, and courage, even when nobody is watching, and especially when the cost is high. His legacy isn't just the record he set or the enemies he defeated. It's the example he left, that ordinary people, when called upon, can rise beyond every expectation and carry the weight of history with steady hands. And long after engines go silent and the skies grow clear again, the world remembers men like him, not because they sought greatness, but because they earned it. In the end, Richard Bong's story becomes something larger than war, larger than aviation, larger even than the 40 victories that carved his name into history. He proved that a quiet farm kid could rise to meet one of the greatest challenges of his generation and do so with humility, precision, and heart. He showed that true skill is not reckless, true courage is not loud, and true greatness does not demand attention. It earns respect through discipline and sacrifice. Bong survived battle after battle in the unforgiving skies of the Pacific, only to lose his life testing the future of aviation on the very day the world entered a new era of warfare. His journey came full circle. He fought to win a war, and he died helping shape what came after it. His record stands, his legacy endures, his impact remains. Richard Ira Bong didn't just change the tide of the Pacific Air War, he changed the standard of what it means to be a pilot, a warrior, and a humble servant of duty. 40 victories, one life, one legacy. America's greatest ace, forever.